Hypatia, how would you answer the contingency argument?
David Hume.
I accept the contingency argument. I'm not sure how to put it.
Do you accept David Hume?
I'm sorry.
Do you accept David Hume's conclusion on the contingency argument?
Well, he gives a dilemma based off of... Who's echoing?
Nadia, you're echoing. I'm going to mute you, alright?
Is this the Leibnizian?
Really
You're talking about the
distant
Leibnizian contingency, yeah?
I'm sorry.
You're talking about the Leibnizian contingency argument, yeah?
Well, I mean, there are different versions. I like Ibn Sina's the best, but I guess you could see Leibniz's version as sort of an extension of that.
So Hume accepted the contingency argument. He just described the necessary being as the universe.
Well, where did he say that? I thought in
I don't know.
Dialogue Concerning Natural Religion, in the discussion between Philo, Cleanthus, and Demea, Philo gives a dilemma based off of modal epistemology as to why the contingency argument fails, and Demea just moves on. So I'm not sure where he accepted the contingency argument. He
I'll
seemed
try
to
and get
repeat
to the
it.
reference.
What's that, Matt?
I'll try and get the reference.
One thing I will say, though, is I think a lot of Hume interpreters today do think he was some type of theist, but just one that was very, very skeptical of most of the arguments for theism.
What do you think is the best objection to the argument to contingency?
PSR.
Just reject the PSR, I guess.
Just like go fuck the PSR?
I guess you could put it like that.
Do you have a sufficient explanation for doing that?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Hypatia. Can you explain on that, Hypatia, why the why you would reject it?
Well, I don't reject it, but
No, if you did. I mean, sorry.
Why you think that's the best objection?
well, the most popular type of objection. Well, there's two kinds. One is sort of the argument that Hume gives based off of modal epistemology, which is this idea that if you think conceivability entails possibility, it seems we can conceive of inexplicable events, something popping into existence uncaused or something existing eternally, and also not having a reason for its existence, either within or without. And he wants to say that if that's conceivable, that's possible. If that's possible, then the PSR is false, because the PSR presumably holds necessarily. That would
So
be
here's
one note.
That's
Sorry.
the reference in the side chat to David Hume. Yeah, that's from Stanford. No, that's from Stanford, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if he's not saying the universe is necessary there. He's just saying that there's a need for an
Interpreting the contingent being in premise 1 as the universe, Bertrand Russell denies. So it's saying Bertrand Russell interpreting the contingent being in premise 1 as the universe, he denies that the universe needs an explanation.
Yeah, he denies the PSR. If you see that discussion he has with Copleston, he doesn't accept Copleston's putting forward of the PSR. He doesn't think every contingent fact, for every fact needs an explanation.
I have made use of his argument from contingent to necessary being, basing the argument on the principle of sufficient reason, simply because it seems to me a brief and clear formulation of what is, in my opinion, the fundamental metaphysical argument for God's existence.
But, to my mind, a necessary proposition has got to be analytic. I don't see what else it can mean. The difficulty of this argument is that I don't admit the idea of a necessary being, and I don't admit that there is any particular meaning in calling other beings contingent.
So, like I was saying, like with Hume, like when I was responding to Xbox, like one of the ways Hume objects to the PSR is this idea that if you think conceivability entails possibility, they want to say it's conceivable, you could have, you know, an uncaused contingent thing, and they want to say that's possible. If that's possible, then the PSR is false, because presumably the PSR is necessarily true. That would be one route. The other, what?
Which has responses, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just giving a sketch of the ways someone might reject it. And then the other sort of argument is just that if you accept the PSR, you have to accept some type of modal collapse, which is that every fact is in fact necessary. If you say, like, the cosmos has an explanation in a necessary being or something like that, well, a necessary fact will only explain other necessary facts. No contingent fact can be self-explanatory, so you eliminate contingency. And they want to say that, well, modal collapse is implausible, that this is the only possible world, or things couldn't have otherwise been. And since the PSR entails modal collapse, they want to say that means we have a reason to reject the PSR. I think that's the other more popular type of objection. If you want a reference on that, Van Inwagen in his book Metaphysics, he has
He's a bit of an idiot.
Van Inwagen in his book Metaphysics has a discussion of the
He's a bit of an idiot, though, isn't he?
objections.
He's a bit of an
sorry?
idiot, though. He's a bit of an idiot, though.
Why do you say that?
He's a materialist.
So you're saying,
I don't see why it means that he's an idiot.
Oh, definitely. If you're a materialist, you've lost rationality.
I guess you're just being facetious.
Christian and that homonym attack. So
No, I'm
I
just
think
being...
he's just being facetious. But anyway.
yeah, that's probably it.
But, you know, Van Inwagen is an interesting character, but he's got some strange ideas. Platonic forms and things like that existing. He calls himself a Christian, things like that. So that's just two of his unchristian ideas: the existence of Platonic forms and materialism.
Why would it be unchristian? Why would materialism be unchristian?
In John chapter 1, verses 1 to 4.
Well, I mean, there's like a wide range of exegetical views on that. I mean,
Well, that just means there's, you can take a text and you can interpret it in different ways, yeah. You
well,
can
I mean,
play
it's not
fast
like
and
it's
loose.
it's
You
not
can play
like a
fast
settled
and loose with
issue.
the text.
It's not like a settled issue that when
In exegesis
creates
of-
everything apart from himself.
That's what it says.
No, but what I'm saying is that it's not a settled issue that when in John or whatever it says that God created everything apart from himself, that he's referring explicitly to also including necessarily existent, causally inert, abstract objects. Van Inwagen restricts the universal quantifier there to refer to concrete objects.
Yeah.
Obviously,
and on what,
abstract objects are not concrete.
on what justification from the Greek text?
Well, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I couldn't give you an answer to it. But it doesn't seem particularly implausible, at least on first pass. I mean, it seems doubtful that, you know, when the church fathers were drafting up, you know, the Nicene Creed and interpreting and setting out the particular doctrines, that when they said God is the maker of all things seen and unseen, that they're referring specifically to this idea of Platonic, necessarily existing, causally inert, abstract objects, which
Why
serve
not?
as exemplifiable.
Those things? Aren't they things?
I mean, again, it's you're getting into, I think, an exegetical issue. It just seems implausible to suggest that well, when they're talking about things, I mean, I would suggest, or it seems more plausible that by things they're things seen and unseen, they're referring to, you know, the material world as well as, you know, things unseen, like, you know, angels, demons, heaven, hell, that sort of thing. You know, basically concrete objects in some fashion or another. But I mean, that's just sort of a inter-Christian debate, so I'm not sure how philosophically interesting it is.
You've presented this argument consistently. I have to grant you that a philosophical atheist must deny all gods.
When a philosophical atheist does deny all gods.
Does deny all gods and must deny all gods and reject all gods and prove that no gods are there when discussing with a theist. When you've got a theist who, for example, claims that the Christian God is the only God and no other gods exist, when you're arguing with him, you only have to negate the Christian God because you both agree that no other gods exist, and therefore you have won the argument when you're in that debate with that theist.
Yeah, now, you've won the argument that the God they believe in doesn't exist. You haven't presented the argument that no gods exist or defended it.
That's not relevant when you're in a debate.
You have to settle what's admissible as the God or not. Because, I mean, certain conceptions of God, I think, aren't philosophically
any seriously proposed God of theism. Atheism is a response to theism. So,
do you see that as a cluster concept?
Say again?
As a cluster concept of, like, necessity, omnipotence, omniscience, those kinds of properties?
Oh.
I mean, I take it that you're excluding things like the Homeric gods or whatnot, because I'm not sure if those would be philosophically interesting to talk about. I mean, you'd have practical consequences.
Philosophical atheism is a response to theistic claims. So any seriously proposed theistic God needs to be addressed by philosophical atheism if they're going to.
Well, what are you defining as theism there, though? Because I'm not sure, like, what. I'm sorry.
Belief in God.
But the
theism, I mean, we'd want to get clear on what's meant by God there. I mean, I can call my water God.
The theism of an individual theist is the key thing that they are arguing. Your theism, if I was to say it, although you have denied it recently, let's say your theism is the Christian God. You already negate the possibility of any other gods.
Yeah. So if you defeat my God,
then in the debate,
me and you would agree in the debate no gods exist.
No gods exist. However, and in a debate with Ocean, for example, it would be a massively different thing because he's a pagan and he believes, and I believe that he believes in lots of different gods.
You're confusing
two subjects. After you answer
you're confusing
him?
Two subjects. The subjects you're confusing are this: demonstrating that a particular theism is false, and demonstrating that philosophical atheism is true. Those are two different subjects.
Sure, but like...
Have we gotten clear on what theism means in this context?
I've already said that, believing in God.
Well, what counts as God in this context? I mean, I can call my...
Any seriously proposed to exist God.
Is a pantheist a theist?
You just use God in that definition, though. I mean, that's not illuminating the question. If you're saying that by God you mean any seriously proposed God, that's still leaving the term, you know, unanalyzed.
That's because God is a generic term. It's not a specific... God can be a universal. It can be defined by... There are various theisms. There is not one theism. There is not one definition of God out there. There's not one
I'm not denying that, but I think we would have an idea of what's admissible within the extension of God, right? Like,
that's why
I could call my water bottle God, but it's not
God. You couldn't call your water bottle God because your water bottle doesn't meet the criteria I gave which is any seriously proposed theistic God. Your water bottle doesn't count.
In your argument, Matt, you would have to show as well that any other God does not exist and cannot exist. Because if you're proposing the Christian God,
I'm proposing one God
under your theism, for philosophical theism to be the exact opposite of philosophical atheism, you would have to show and prove that no other gods exist also.
And that makes it completely irrelevant.
That makes it irrelevant. However, you would have to show even further that your God is much, much more likely than any other gods.
Of course. If you're presenting the case for the existence of the God of Christianity, that's your burden of evidence.
And the problem is that we would just go round and round in circles in any discussion around this philosophical atheism versus philosophical theism thing, because we would all have to negate every other god, except the only thing is you only have to propose your one.
You have a disconnect in your mind on this subject.
No, I think you do.
You think that if you engage with an individual theist and you're able to demonstrate to that individual theist that their particular God doesn't exist, that you have affirmed and presented and defended successfully philosophical atheism, the belief that no God exists.
I think you're wrong there. I think that you would have disconfirmed one conception of deity.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That one person proposed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's all he's done.
Which strengthens the case against God's existence.
Very marginally, given the fact of the existence of over 4,000 proposed gods, it's a very marginal thing to.
Seriously proposed gods. I heard you say that there were only 2 or 3 last time. That I think it was in Xbox's room.
Not. There are many. I mean, there are many seriously proposed gods. There's the God of Christianity.
Well, 2 questions. What counts as a seriously proposed God? And secondly, what's supposed to be philosophically interesting about it being seriously proposed? Because that just seems to be historical.
Because what you're doing is you're lessening the burden of evidence on the philosophical atheist. You can be silly. You can be silly about it, and you can say, "Listen, you claim there's no gods. Okay, my hot water bottle's a god. It exists. Here it is. Here."
Right. We recognize that's not. No, but what I'm saying is we recognize that's not what's meant when theists like Plotinus and Plato and Socrates and whatnot say they believe in something like a god. That's not what they mean by God.
Of course not, but it didn't stop you presenting that as an example 5 minutes ago.
I could argue.
No, but the reason I presented that as an example. Sorry, go ahead, Lydia.
No, it's fine.
Go ahead.
The reason I presented it 5 minutes ago is that when you're saying that when you define God earlier just as a seriously proposed God, it can't be as simple as just saying that we can label something God. There has to be something to that concept such that certain objects or certain conceptions are admissible within the extension of the term
That's incorrect.
And certain... you don't think it's the case that certain objects are in the extension and other objects are not?
By seriously proposed God, you mean any God that's been proposed by an established group of individuals, normally found in a religion.
Why should that matter?
Because that's the only gods which are seriously proposed.
That's not answering the question as to why it should matter that it's, quote, seriously proposed. That's just historical article.
No, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to be charitable and reasonable with the atheist. You can put the burden of evidence on them for their claim there are no gods, and you can say, okay, you have to disprove any god, even gods I just make up.
Is that why religious people keep changing the definition of God on us?
Do they?
Just because
my definition of God has been.
Seems to me that the more people make theology up, then make. Sorry, I'm getting grumpy.
My definition of God has been consistent for about 20 years. So where have I changed my definition of God?
I didn't say you.
Yeah, so, well, I'm a religious person.
I know, but it seems to me that every time an argument comes up against a proposed God, then the definition of that God is altered to fit the argument presented against it.
Then what you should do is you should raise your game and you should engage with more informed theists then.
Well, maybe I can just jump ahead to what I was sort of trying to make, and what I think is a better way to sort of frame the issue that's fruitful for both theists and atheists. Obviously, my water bottle doesn't count as God, but even beyond, I'm not sure what anything interesting follows from this idea of seriously proposed, because that just seems to be a historical artifact, not something with any interesting philosophical properties. But what I think is at stake there is that when the theist says they believe in God, or when the atheist says they don't believe in God, they're not talking about the equivalent of a very powerful alien. When an atheist says, I don't believe in God, they're not explicitly denying Superman doesn't exist, or the Green Lantern doesn't
because
exist.
they're not seriously proposed gods. They're just inventions of men.
Well, imagine for the sake of argument that Superman existed. Would atheism cease to be true if supposing that?
Yeah, because he's not defined as a god. He's not proposed to be a god. He's just proposed to be a Superman.
He's remarkably like Mercury. The Flash is remarkably like Mercury.
But that's what I'm saying. Like even the Homeric so-called gods are not interesting from a philosophical perspective. I mean, the Homeric gods are just. I mean, they have practical consequences.
No one today is seriously proposing as a theistic god the Homeric gods. So it
really, 2,000 people. There are 2,000 people in Greece that still believe in them. But there's a documentary on Vice about it, actually.
2,000 people. Well, if there's 2,000 people putting forward a position, then it would become a seriously proposed god, and the atheist, the philosophical atheist, would need to engage with them. You're trying to make the conversation between the philosophical atheist and the theist a reasonable conversation, and trying to put upon them a burden of evidence that becomes impossible for them to bear. For me, is just silly.
No, but my point is just simply that I don't think the question of the Homeric gods, the question of the Aztec gods, the so-called Sumerian gods, I don't think any of that is relevant to theism and atheism, because they're not the philosophically interesting conception of deity that's been at stake for the last 2,500 years.
If they have a substantial following, and they're proposing that Homer is something is a god, then the atheist has to demonstrate, the philosophical atheist...
Homer was never
they have to demonstrate that God doesn't exist.
And all argue the historicity of Scylla and Charybdis? That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye, Lydia.
Bye, Lydia.
But all saying is that I think you're focusing on, I think, what is a philosophically irrelevant property, which is namely, historically speaking, what sort of conceptions have, come into prominence.
I'm not talking historically, I'm talking currently.
But why should that matter either?
Because the atheist doesn't have a position. Because the atheist is not going to be presented. They're not going to be presented with irrelevant gods like Thor and Zeus and things like that. Those aren't seriously proposed theistic gods.
So well, there are people that still believe in them.
So they don't have a burden of evidence.
You're saying all those gods aren't seriously proposed gods? Yeah. Why are pagans believing them then?
Well, yeah, I mean, if pagans want to come forward and say, we are proposing this is God, and there's a substantial amount of them who are proposing that, then that moves into the area of a seriously proposed God. Therefore, the philosophical atheist has a burden of evidence to demonstrate it does not exist.
So what you require is not so much sufficient evidence, but just more of this evidence, more voices saying and standing behind this God.
To count as a seriously proposed God, you need to have people seriously proposing it. That kind of follows.
Well, that's not really that justified, because you could have a million people shouting at you with shit arguments, or you could have one person giving you like a really good argument.
It's not about their support for what they're proposing. It's the fact that there's a significant number of people who are putting forward a serious proposition.
Why is that philosophically interesting?
It's philosophically interesting because the subject is a burden of evidence on philosophical atheists.
Right.
If you want to put the burden on
them, philosophical atheism is not a question about historically or in the present what conceptions of deity are popular. But from a philosophical standpoint, when an atheist is saying, I don't believe in God or gods, or when a theist says, I believe in a God or I believe in God, there's a particular sense or intention to the term that's been talked about for the last 2,500 plus
Absolute
years.
nonsense.
Right.
When the philosophical atheist says, I believe in no gods, I assert no gods exist, it's a universal statement. They're not referring to a specific god.
No, I
They
agree.
don't have a particular god that they're addressing that to, but to all gods.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but what I'm saying is that there are certain sorts of things, given the intention of the term God, as to what is or isn't admissible within the extension of the term God. Like, it can't just simply be a matter of historical artifact that, historically speaking, it is the case that Christianity happened to become popular. What I'm saying is that even if Christianity, Islam, and Judaism never rose into prominence, the philosophically interesting conception of God would still be the type of gods talked about in those religions. Because, again, theism, atheism is not a discussion over whether the equivalent of a Superman exists, because that's what the Homeric gods just are. They're just the equivalent of a very powerful space alien. And that's not a philosophically interesting debate to have.
Well,
I mean, it'll have practical consequences.
Well, it'll
have ethical consequences.
Well, that might not be that might not be a philosophically interesting discussion for you, but you don't speak for the whole of philosophy. Hate to tell you that.
Well, I mean,
okay, you're one individual. You're one individual sharing your views about what's philosophically interesting, and there are other individuals sharing their view about what they think is philosophically interesting.
But if you actually trace,
you don't get a free pass somewhere to have your view considered of more value than someone else's view.
But what I'm saying is, you don't think it's interesting that if you actually trace the history of philosophy of religion, there's only a very few conceptions of deity that are actually at stake in those discussions, even going back to Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. Well, Socrates wasn't a polytheist. Well, then you just have to go through the history of philosophy.
And you're assuming I haven't done that. You're assuming I haven't done that. Why are you assuming that?
Well, what I'm saying is just simply, if we look at the prominent sort of...
How many denominations in Christianity is there?
Well, presumably there's all one cluster concept that they revolve around. Like if they started denying
omnipotence... How many denominations are there?
But again, 69. the fact that they all count as Christian, as opposed to, again, the fact that they all count as Christian, as opposed to being an atheist, is that there's presumably a particular cluster concept at stake there, namely...
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, that's easily contradicted by the fact that you can point to the concept of the Protestant God and the Catholic God, and you can point to a diametrically opposing God of Christianity and Mormonism.
Well, that's why I was saying that it's a cluster concept. Like if they start denying all of the omnis, if they start denying that God is eternal, that God's omnipotent, that God's omniscient, that God is perfectly good, that God isn't necessarily existent, at that point they're not talking about Christianity anymore. They're just talking about some other view.
Well, that's
what I'm saying.
So what you're doing is you get to decide as one individual who's explored a little bit of philosophy. You get to decide which groups count as...
it's the same view shared by Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Maimonides, Aquinas, Plotinus.
Listen, those are all dead. Those are all dead people. Who cares what those dead people thought? You've moved on from them.
Wow.
They're dead in the water individuals. Okay.
I mean, in the philosophy of religion, it's the perfect being, like God concept that's mostly put forward, right?
And even when they discuss like non-theistic conceptions of deity, there is a particular sort of conception at stake, like some type of pantheism or some type of panentheism. I mean, like the types of beings like the Homeric gods they're not even seriously taken within Socrates and Aristotle and Plato.
You're trying to exclude people from the philosophical discussion.
No, if they bring a God claim to like argue for it, then we're not saying no. Too bad. It's not. No one's saying that though.
Were you trolling when you said dismiss it because the person is dead?
Yeah, philosophy is not a static subject. Okay, we've learned a lot. Philosophically speaking, we've learned a lot from Aristotle. Some of their ideas can live on today. They're dead, and they're not. And if they were alive today, if they happened to live throughout all these generations, they would probably go back on some of the stuff they put forward as philosophy and recant and refute themselves.
Well, do you think all of those individuals I mentioned would take seriously the concept of the equivalent of a Superman as being admissible within the extension of the concept of God?
No one has suggested that Superman should be.
The Homeric gods are not very different. You know,
it doesn't matter whether they property. It doesn't matter whether they are or not. Their properties are irrelevant.
Then you're focusing on a historical accident, which seems completely irrelevant.
I'm focusing on reality. I'm focusing on the real world situation where a philosophical atheist encounters someone who believes in a Homeric god, and you say there's about 2,000 people currently who believe in that. So that's a substantial number of people who hold belief in that god. And if they encounter a philosophical atheist, the philosophical atheist is saying no gods exist. They are proposing a god, and they're doing it in a serious fashion. They're not playing at games or making up gods just for the sake of doing it or for the sake of argument. So they present their god. The philosophical atheist, by their position, is saying does not exist. They have a burden of evidence to demonstrate that.
Let me ask you this, Matt. Suppose, as a matter of historical contingency, that it had turned out that in the present that there were several thousand people that believed that the invisible pink unicorn existed, and they called it a deity. Yeah. On your conception, does that mean that the question of atheism, theism has now somehow been altered, or that philosophically speaking, that there's some new question at stake, that when I say that I'm an atheist, I'm explicitly denying the existence of the invisible pink unicorn in this historically contingent circumstance?
If people are proposing the invisible pink unicorn to be God, and they're proposing that in a serious manner, not in an ad hoc way, just in order to combat if it's analogous to the Homeric gods or to the Christian gods, then the atheist has their burden of evidence.
Yeah,
they're making the strong claim. They're making the strong claim.
You're just focusing on a historical irrelevance.
By putting a discussion to gods which are presently seriously proposed, I'm obviously not restricting my conversation to history.
Sure, you're saying presently, so supposedly, that entails that in the past there was a different set of seriously proposed gods. So
correct, which the atheist does not have a burden of evidence to refute, because no one is seriously proposing them to exist.
What's up, Hypatia?
But also that the theist doesn't have a seriously proposed, doesn't have a burden of evidence, or whatever you want to call it,
of course they do.
Reject.
Both sides have a burden of evidence. The theist has a burden of evidence if they assert that their God exists.
And a burden of evidence to reject the other gods.
Right, exactly. That you're saying are no longer seriously proposed. That's why I'm saying you're just focusing on a historical irrelevancy. I don't think that the issue would somehow change over time, or that it should matter that in the past people said this, now they say this. I mean, questions about knowledge, immortality, mind, and so forth, they're not questions that somehow become
what matters is
the truth and veracity of those views are not updated depending on which philosophical view is currently trendy, or how many people believe in a particular view. I don't think that's the philosophically interesting property.
But some people get so stuck on the past philosophers they forget about current philosophy. And we should be focusing not on the dead philosophers. Maybe their ideas that have prevailed throughout to the present day. Yeah, definitely. But we should be looking at current philosophy and producing current philosophy that's addressing all the same issues, but from a current philosophical position based on the knowledge that we have.
In current philosophy, the Homeric gods, the panoply of Hindu gods, the Shintoist, Kami, and whatever, none of those are entities at stake within philosophy of religion. If you look at any philosophy of religion journal, they don't talk about that. They talk about.
It doesn't matter whether they talk about it or not.
Well, then why are you focusing on current philosophy?
Because what I'm talking about, because the position of the philosophical. You see that word there, philosophical atheist. The philosophical atheist, they're making the claim about no gods exist. Now you can either broaden that out to a ridiculous level where your hot water bottle can become a god, or you can try and restrict that and narrow that down a little bit.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that when we restrict it, there is a continuous conception of
reasonable
deity.
standard, and you don't do that by saying, oh, well, okay, here's the reasonable standard. If it's not proposed in the philosophy of religion, and it's not spoken about in the philosophy of religion, it's irrelevant.
So we shouldn't say that?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
That's it.
So instead, we should focus on the historical irrelevancy as to which religion became popular.
That would be excluding people from the discussion, and you want to be as inclusive as possible in your discussions about philosophy. And I'm not looking to exclude people because I have some hang up about what philosophers of religion talk about today. Who cares?
But that's no. This. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead. It's okay.
Well, just the issue is, like I already mentioned earlier, look, if someone comes in and wants to throw down about Thor, I'm fine with that. The issue is that when you're arguing against someone, presumably it should, the topic would be, does God exist? And you're arguing against the God that the other person is proposing. It shouldn't all of a sudden be, no, I have to
What I'm discussing is the burden of evidence on the philosophical atheist. I'm not talking about someone going into a hangout and saying, I'm a theist, here's my definition of God, let's debate it. I'm talking about a philosophical atheist going into a hangout and making a declaration, no gods exist. And someone saying, okay, let's see if you can bear your burden of evidence for that.
But there's an exact opposite to that, Matt, and that is, does a God does exist, and the philosophical theist, which I would classify you as, has a burden of not only providing the arguments for that God, but for providing the arguments that deny all the other gods in exactly
that's easy. That's so simply done.
Exactly the same way as
and my burden of evidence is so light I can bear it easily just by showing that my God exists. Because if my God exists, and if I can show my God exists, that God has revealed that no other gods exist. So by showing that my God exists, all other gods are excluded.
And if my argument negates your specific God, as you have described it, that already
you have falsified one God.
No, I've falsified all of them because you've already falsified all the other ones.
Because I have the belief
that the others don't exist.
Listen, because I believe no other gods exist does not make it the case that no other gods exist. I could be wrong.
Well, that makes it a lack-theist argument, really, doesn't it? That makes it a lack-theist argument.
I can go into a hangout with a philosophical atheist and I can say, hey, I'm a Christian theist. I'm going to debate you. And we can have that debate. And let's say he won it. That doesn't get you to no gods exist because I believe no gods exist. Maybe Islam's true.
It doesn't get you to your proposal either, and that's where you have just the same burden as the philosophical.
No one has denied that. No one has denied that in this discussion that the theist doesn't have an equal burden of evidence. That's a straw man.
If both parties in a debate already agree that every one of the other gods do not exist, and one of them says this one exists and the other one says it doesn't, that is the debate. That's the whole debate. That's all the debate that is required.
And let's say the
philosophical atheist to show.
What logically follows for philosophical atheism if the atheist wins that debate?
A next discussion with somebody else.
Have they demonstrated by some sort of evidence or proof that no gods exist?
They go on to a next discussion with somebody else. Somebody like Ocean, somebody like Farhan.
So that's an admission that they have not bore their burden of evidence that no gods exist. All they've done
is within that argument.
Bore their burden of evidence that one particular God doesn't exist.
They have done in that argument, Matt.
Yeah, philosophical atheism is not the belief that in an individual argument I can show that a specific God does not exist. Philosophical atheism is the position that no gods exist.
You keep saying that, and I disagree with you fundamentally when it comes to a debate
you don't agree
format.
that's the definition of philosophical atheism?
Let Joe come in. No, I'm happy with the definition. What's the point of everybody arguing for the same thing?
I think you realise
the 99.9% of other gods, because neither of you believe them. It's an irrelevance.
I don't think you get
it. The only discussion is the argument about the one God you're proposing.
That still does not get you to philosophical atheism. That's the point.
You keep saying that. We're just going to have to agree to disagree, because I think you're talking crap.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's three.
I don't think you'll find anyone disagreeing with my crap.
Well, there's three kind of points I want to ask. I guess the weakest would be, Matt, if I went into a room and like everyone had a different idea of God, and I said I was a philosophical atheism, would it at least be reasonable for me to take on each of these people one at a time, or would I have to give arguments to that has to speak to all of them and take them on all at once?
No, you can do it. You can do it individual God by individual God, or you can have a more generic argument.
There we go.
So let's say, for example, let's say, for example, they said. There's 9 people in the hangout. We all believe in God, but it's all different gods. And the philosophical atheist said, okay, so just a quick question for you all. Is your God a supernatural God? Yeah, of course, yeah. All 9 said yes. And then the philosophical atheist presented a sound deductive argument for philosophical naturalism. All 9 have been defeated.
Yeah, sure. Now, the other one is there's an argument that I always kind of run, which is if there are no good reasons to believe God exists, then that is a good reason to believe that God does not exist. Since I haven't heard any good reasons, I think I'm fine. I think that is a good reason to stay with my belief that God doesn't exist.
Reasoning.
Why?
It doesn't logically follow because you've not seen good reasons for something, that there's no good reason for something. So you should be cautious.
Looking for them. Sure.
You should be modest about the breadth of your knowledge and recognize, well, okay, so I've not seen any good reasons to believe in God, but I'm very limited in regards to my knowledge. Maybe if I was a professional philosopher of religion.
You don't think that's a good reason, though? I mean, I have no good reasons to believe that leprechauns exist, but that's not a good reason to believe that leprechauns don't exist.
You do have good reason to believe leprechauns don't exist. By definition, they don't exist. They're mythical beings.
Well, pick whatever, like pixies, whatever.
Same thing.
I don't think it's as trivial as that.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not taken. I mean, we take them to be mythical because we don't think they exist.
They're defined as mythical. By definition, they're mythical. So the burden of evidence would then, because they're defined in that way, the burden of evidence would then resort to the person who's claiming they exist.
Just fucking take the hypothetical for what it is. You know what he's talking about.
Yeah, like he's just saying, like, imagine someone believes that leprechauns exist, but they obviously think they aren't mythical. And by leprechaun, you know, they mean these kind of small beings that go around with pots of gold, and you know, they give out gold. And that's not changing the definition. That's the same definition of leprechaun as.
The leprechauns are defined as mythical beings.
We're not going to go down this route. You know what I mean, Matt?
Yeah, change the definition.
No,
pretend it's not defined as a myth.
We're not going to go on what's the definition of leprechaun. You know what I meant by my argument, Matt.
Well, what do you mean by your argument? No, you don't have good reason. Because you have a lack of knowledge, your lack of knowledge on a subject is not sufficient to give you knowledge about a subject.
I do have knowledge on a subject. My knowledge is that I haven't heard any. I haven't. Well, I mean, we could say that.
Is it sufficient knowledge?
I mean, we can. What do you mean by sufficient? What would be sufficient knowledge?
Is it sufficient to avoid you being engaged in non sequitur reasoning? So,
I mean,
like for example,
I don't think that it is. So you think it's non sequitur to point out that we have no good reasons to believe that?
No. Let me give you an example, okay? I had my discussion with Deconverted Man last night, okay? And he made the same claim. He made the claim he knows the logical arguments for God, and he studied those arguments. Okay? So he's saying, and they've all got flaws in them. Therefore, I don't believe in any of your gods. The arguments don't work. Okay? So that's similar to you. He's basically saying, I've looked for reasons, I've not found any good reasons, therefore God doesn't exist. Then you ask him about some of those logical arguments, and he misrepresents them, totally misrepresents them, and you say,
well,
well,
I
okay.
think Joe is familiar with those arguments, though.
I'm talking about deconverted man.
Okay,
but we're talking to Joe, not to deconverted.
Yeah, I'm using. Do you know what an analogy is?
The issue, though, Matt, is
man is analogous to Joe.
It is. It's an analogy. It's an analogy to what I'm talking about to Joe, which is it depends on whether you have sufficient level. I'm giving an example of an individual who is making a similar claim to Joe, but obviously when you dig a bit deeper there, does not have sufficient justification. It does not have sufficient justification to say that God does not exist. And
but suppose suppose Joe's canvassed philosophy of religion. You know, he's read his Plantinga, his Swinburne, his Van Inwagen, his Alston, his Haskell.
Yeah, so if he was a philosopher like William Lane Craig or someone like that.
Well, he doesn't have to strictly be a philosopher. You know, he could just be very familiar with philosophy of religion or philosophy in general.
You need to be extremely familiar with it. Yeah.
Then you know, he's canvassed it. He sees these arguments don't seem to be particularly.
And that would be a sufficient level of knowledge, in order to say, I've looked at the evidence.
Well, suppose for the sake of argument that is the case. Suppose Joe is.
Yeah, that's fine. Then he could provisionally say, provisionally no gods exist, and leave it open to, and that would be leaving it open to new evidence coming to his attention.
Yeah, I mean
then I don't think you're disagreeing. And
yeah, then I don't think you're. Yeah, then I don't think what I said was non sequitur. I had a third point.
No. But I don't grant that you have sufficient knowledge about the arguments.
I mean, that's the point. You're supposed to go, well, Joe, this is an argument for God, and we...
Given my discussions with you, I don't think you're sufficiently knowledgeable about the subjects in order to make that conclusion.
But that's the point of the argument, is to move on to those... that's the point of the argument, though, is to move on to the actual arguments that you think are good reasons that I need to consider, right?
Yeah. But don't forget, you need to remember, even if all the arguments for theism fails, it doesn't mean atheism is true. Philosophical atheism has to have its own arguments for its position, not just show that the theistic arguments don't work.
Well, I think what Joe is saying is if you would use the failure of theistic arguments as part of an argument as to why we should either assign a very low probability to or dismiss deity in general.
Well, that would be faulty reasoning. It doesn't logically follow because arguments for theism fail to persuade that atheism is true or correct. Agnosticism could be the correct position. Strong agnosticism could be the right position. On strong agnosticism, all the arguments for theism would fail, but so would all the arguments for atheism.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying the idea is that presumably, you'd want to argue that one should assign a low either prior probability or posterior probability.
I don't know why people are hooked up on this stupid probability shit. It's really tiring to hear this probability shit every discussion.
What's wrong with probability?
It's total utter bullshit. Okay? People are just jumping on the bandwagon of, oh, we can do everything by probability. We can do everything by Boole's theorem. Get some arguments, put the arguments out there, put them under logical scrutiny, and have them either destroyed, which is for atheism is going to be the case 100% of the time.
You haven't really said anything about why probabilistic
because they suck like fuck.
Because
it's just a chicken shit way of avoiding taking upon yourself the strong burden of evidence to demonstrate your case.
I don't think most arguments for theism are...
Probably this, likelihood that, likelihood this, confidence that, confidence this. It's bullshit.
Well, that's how most of our inferences work, I think. I don't think it's plausible.
You just said that most of induction is bullshit.
Well, most of human reasoning is bullshit on that
The
criteria.
scientific method is now bullshit.
Arguments from philosophy are not only inductive, and I would say there's lots of deductive arguments in philosophy.
Right, and arguments in philosophy are not also only deductive either.
Yeah, so where's so where's the deductive arguments? Why is the atheist running away from the deductive side of things?
And many deductive arguments have premises that are supported with induction.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, they're supported probabilistically.
Most deductive arguments have inductive support.
Yeah,
because
so
we look to the real world to support the truth of the premise, but it's still a deductive argument. It doesn't just because
you're just objecting to the form of the argument. You're not objecting to.
Yeah, I am.
You can put a probabilistic argument.
I'm objecting to the bullshit that goes about Google Plus, where people have jumped on a bandwagon of Richard Carrier type Bayes theorem shit, and they think that they're doing some. They think they're doing something wise and wonderful by phrasing their terminology in likelihood or probability and
well, I mean, it's very common. It's very common in philosophy of religion.
No, well, why would I believe you on that? Are you a philosopher of religion person? Are you involved in that discipline?
Well,
are you a philosopher of religion?
No, but I'm very familiar with it.
No, so am I. So who gives a fuck?
I mean, Robin Collins uses
right. I mean, that's how most fine-tuning arguments are formulated in terms.
That's because they're abductive arguments, for fuck's sake.
Okay, but see, Matt, the point is that you're saying that those types of arguments are BS and just a trend, or just like a fad, rather.
I'm saying they're an escape route for weak atheists.
I mean,
this isn't an interesting topic.
Yeah. Okay.
Because an interesting topic is something that Hypatia talks about. If it's not interesting to Hypatia, definitionally, because she's such an expert on the philosophy of religion, definitionally it becomes an uninteresting subject in the philosophy of religion.
Well, Matt, you not knowing probability and being upset about it isn't an interesting.
You might think yourself the Google Plus resident expert on philosophy of religion. I don't agree with that appraisal of yourself.
I don't think I claim that.
Yeah. Then stop presenting yourself in that way. Then
I don't think she. I mean,
I'm just saying that what my perception of philosophy of religion is. You were saying that.
I'm telling you what my perception is.
You don't think probabilistic arguments are.
Yeah, they're used in philosophy. Of course they are. They're not abused in philosophy. And my charge is that many atheists are abusing what's used in the philosophy of religion to stop them from taking on the burden of evidence of what.
All right, well, that sounds like a very different claim. That sounds like a very different claim than the one you originally made. It sounded like you were indicting probabilistic reasoning in general, both either for theism or atheism.
Well, not everything I say is not everything I say is formulated in an analytic way. Sometimes I just say something. You know, it comes to my mind and I just speak what's in my mind.
Like a girl.
Yeah, like a girl. Sometimes I raise my voice like a girl.
Winging it.
Yeah, sometimes I wing it as well.
Right, but I mean, I think what you're saying there is just trivial, though, right? I mean, you're just saying that
of course
misuses of probabilistic reasoning are bad, or misuses, right? I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that, either theist or atheist. So on that concern, I don't think we have any disagreements. I'm not sure like why we need to get into this discussion as to how much I know or am ignorant of with respect to philosophy of religion.
Because you're probably because you're in the company of someone who would abuse those arguments in the way that I'm suggesting, which would be Joe Sonseed.
What I mean, how would you say?
All of your arguments are mainly probabilistic.
I mean, because I use probabilistic arguments, that means that
you abuse probabilistic arguments to hide the ignorance you have of the actual arguments.
So
I haven't talked to Joe about his arguments, but I mean,
why have? Sure. I've had a debate with him.
Yeah, but you haven't really. Which argument am I abusing?
I don't know. I need to go look at the Hangout where I embarrassed.
So you just made a blanket statement about. I mean.
Are you telling me that you, in all the debates you've had against me,
you're going to make a different claim than what you made earlier.
Against Maximus. Can you tell me a debate where you presented a deductive argument?
Yeah.
Okay, how many?
Well, you got to let me answer your question when you ask one. Whenever I do divine hiddenness, that's a deductive argument.
So you do divine hiddenness on a deductive argument. How many arguments do you normally present?
I used to present 5, but I don't think I'm going to do that anymore.
So 1 out of 5 then.
So I still don't see. You think that because I present a lot of arguments that are inductive arguments, I'm abusing probability. One of the other ways you can approach inductive arguments is using the explanationist approach, which is looking at theoretical virtues, which isn't like appealing to justificationism, which would be using probability. That's also what I do. So I have the deductive argument, but then I use...
You have one deductive argument.
I'm sorry, I have the deductive argument, and then I use an explanationist approach, which wouldn't be, strictly speaking, which wouldn't actually be relying on probability. Matt, I think you're just... I don't even think I did anything, and you're attacking me.
I'm not attacking you, it's an observation.
Yeah, but you don't have any specific evidence to make the observation, and you just decided because probability is used by other people.
No. I'm basing it on my own experience and observation of you in debates. One with myself, the other with Maximus. Those are the two that come to mind most readily, and how you performed in those debates. And how you normally present things when the occasions where I'm...
Well, Joe, what arguments do you use?
For inductive arguments, if you're presenting inductive arguments and you present them well, no one's complaining about that. What I'm saying is there's a tendency, there's a trend that I'm finding, there's a trend of internet atheists coming in and just automatically defaulting to base theorem to everything. And inductive arguments and probabilistic arguments everywhere.
Joe, what arguments do you tend to use?
What is it? Divine hiddenness, and then there's... Well, divine hiddenness would be what I use, and then the explanationist approach presenting the evidential problem of evil. Those are the arguments I would use. I think Matt might be remembering my... likelihood argument.
Yeah.
Or not likelihood, the likeliness argument that I run. But that's not base theorem. Yeah, it's more of an argument in order to charge the other person to present a more specific God in the debate.
But let's just go with the two that you mentioned, right? Like those are the two that you tend to use all the time: divine hiddenness and the evidential problem of evil, like on an explanationist approach. I mean, those are perfectly, I don't know if I say perfectly, but I mean, those are prominent arguments within the philosophy of religion. You know, Draper uses an explanationist version of the problem of evil. Schellenberg obviously puts forth divine hiddenness as an argument.
Yeah, of course they do.
So, I mean, if those are the...
How does it logically follow? How does it logically follow? Because good philosophers put forward good arguments that internet pretend philosophers put forward good arguments.
We're not talking about atheists in general. We're talking about Joe.
Other people. Yeah, exactly. Your experience of Joe is different from my experience of Joe.
Are you saying that Joe misrepresents Schellenberg and Draper?
I'm saying that Joe doesn't know the arguments very well.
Well, I guess that's possible. I mean, you've talked to him about these issues. I can't tell you yes or no, but I mean...
Exactly. So I'm speaking from a position of experience. Maybe I should put it probabilistically.
Well, let's see. I can... the issue is I could tell the difference between the logical problem of evil and the evidential problem of evil. Someone in this room couldn't last time we talked about it.
Really?
Yeah.
What does that demonstrate, Joe?
Who could demonstrate?
Who did know the difference?
Would that demonstrate that in a one-on-one debate, where we had a specific subject like the logical and evidential problem of evil, that you would win that debate?
Matt, what are you trying to do?
What I'm saying
first
is
you attacked probability.
This is what I'm saying
just
to you,
to
Joe.
attack me?
This is what I'm saying to you. There is no
yeah,
one
but Matt, all you do is just argue about the definition of atheism instead. Okay, go ahead.
There's no one more critical. There's no one more critical of things that I say in a hangout, maybe if I'm winging it or I'm speaking off the top of my head type thing, than I am. Okay, I just done a 10 video response, 10-part video response to a hangout I was present in and I was participating in, and I done it in 10 parts. I broke up
my character.
I'm not attacking your character. I'm attacking your arguments and your presentation of them.
No, you haven't attacked a single one of my arguments, though.
I didn't.
You just said I don't know the arguments.
I said this is what I said. This is what I said. I said this. I don't think you know the arguments very well.
And you failed fantastically at demonstrating that.
Wait a minute. How does that equate to a personal attack on you?
You've been attacking me this whole time, Matt. Instead of actually addressing,
I invited you to a one-on-one discussion. I said to you,
you don't want to talk about the arguments now. You just want to
I said, hey Joe, let's go into a hangout. Let's have a one-on-one informal discussion for a couple of hours, and I'll demonstrate you don't know the arguments very well.
I don't like.
Why not just have the discussion here?
Because like I said,
I mean, last time I wanted to talk about dualism with you, you're like, oh, it's not the proper forum.
No, it wasn't the proper forum. It wasn't
the proper forum because you were just talking about it for like 45 minutes with two other people. But once you talk to someone who you know knows more about it than those people,
what do you mean? I mean, I've discussed with some of the best minds on Google Plus on the subject of theism and atheism. And I would do so again.
Wait.
Is Matt trying to deny that he's a coward?
Jack, I don't know.
Matt.
Jack, I'm going to give you one more chance to behave yourself.
Too harsh language from Matt.
And if you don't, then I'm going to block you.
Okay, so Coward Bell.
Okay, you're blocked.
Okay, he deserves to be kicked from the hangout now, according to Nadia's rules.
Boom.
I don't think this is a fruitful direction to go down. But,
it's not a fruit. No, well, there's no moderator
What's
here,
not
unfortunately, who's awake to control the behaviour of
Matt just
Jack,
violated Nadia's rules.
You don't have any option. He's going to be an asshole. I'm not going to tolerate him as an asshole, so he's blocked. I gave him warning. I gave him a chance. I said, hey, you got one chance. He didn't take the chance. He's blocked.
I'm just not sure how the conversation moved in this direction.
It moved in this direction because Jack came into the hangout.
Not really interested in having a serious discussion.
No,
right?
I'm not talking about when Jack came into the hangout. I was talking about this whole discussion.
Joe doesn't like it. Joe doesn't like it when someone says to him that they think he doesn't know the arguments very well. If someone says to me, "Hey, Matt,"
who's trying to
like the deconverted man said the other day there.
He's not actually.
Well, what about you? Why don't you present the modal ontological argument? I said I wouldn't do that because I don't know modal logic. I'm not going to even try it.
Right? He just.
If someone says to me, "Let's talk about the philosophical support for premise 2 of the Callum cosmological argument," I say no, thank you. I don't know mathematics enough. So it's no shame to be modest in your claims about knowledge about arguments.
Rules. For somebody to block.
It's only when you elevate your knowledge to a level you don't want.
Who has mods here? But
that's when the problem arises.
Immediately. Who does have mods?
It would be Country Girl Latrell. Who did what?
Huh?
I haven't blocked anybody.
Yeah, never. Me too. Nobody did anything?
Yeah, Matt blocked me, which is a violation of Nadia's rules.
I don't know, because I don't know whether asshole's speaking or not. I don't want to overtalk them.
Matt, the problem isn't whether speaking or not. The problem is people just get kicked straight away for blocking regularly on this channel.
Well, yeah, when Nadia
so
wakes up,
why
she
are
can
you
kick
holding
me. Who
your
gives a
action?
fuck?
If you don't want to speak to him, you're the one that not
You don't understand you don't understand. Jack doesn't stop. He just ruined the whole hangout. So hopefully he's going to drop, and then he won't be able to come back in under that ID, and then the hangout can return to some sort of decency
Is there a
without
reason why
bullies in
Matt
it.
isn't being kicked?
And if he comes back in on
Somebody
another
have
ID, I'll
mods
block
here?
that one as well.
I'm not
And I'll
sure
keep
what we're even
blocking.
I'm honestly surprised you've not been kicked yet, Matt, because like normally
Nadia's sleeping.
Who has
regulars in this chat even more than like Gus.
Alright, he
He's
left.
kicked for that shit. So it's not really fair. And he's here. He's a hell of a more regular than Matt Bell is. So just blocking just isn't tolerated.
Okay, Hangout ends in 5 minutes. I just posted the new link in the side chat.
Was he kicked or did they just leave?
That I don't know. I didn't kick anybody.